Long before marble columns rose or gold leaf gleamed, the story of Mar-a-Lago was written in salt water and sand. It begins with catastrophe, or perhaps providence, on January 9th, 1878. The Spanish brig Providencia, a sturdy cargo vessel sailing from Havana to Barcelona, carried a fortune in a most unlikely form. 20,000 coconuts tightly packed in the hold. A sudden squall drove her onto a hidden reef just off the coast of southeastern Florida. The ship splintered against a coral. The crew abandoned her, and the surf claimed the cargo. Thousands of brown-husked coconuts bobbed ashore onto a narrow, unnamed barrier island that separated the open Atlantic from Lake Worth Lagoon. A scattering of hardy settlers, perhaps 24 families, lived there in crude palmetto-thatched cabins amid dense scrub palmetto and mangrove. They had arrived in the early 1870s, drawn by rumors of fertile land and mild winters, but found instead relentless heat, mosquitoes, sudden hurricanes, and supplies that arrived only when a boat happened to appear. When word spread of the wreck, they did not rush to save lives. The sailors had already rowed to safety. Instead, they raced to claim salvage rights. Carts, wheelbarrows, even bare hands gathered the bounty. Some families ate the sweetmeat and drank the milk. Most saw something far more valuable: seeds. The coconut palm was not native to Florida, but the island's sandy soil, abundant sun, and warm, humid climate proved ideal. Within a few seasons, the first palms took root. By the late 1880s, long rows of them lined the shore, their fronds swaying like green feathers against the sky. What had been a monotonous tangle of vegetation now looked almost Caribbean, exotic, inviting, tropical. Northern visitors who braved the difficult journey south began to notice. They called the place Palm Beach, and the name stuck. Life on the island remained austere. Summers pressed down with suffocating humidity. Storms arrived without warning, flattening crops and flooding homes. The nearest city of any size, Jacksonville, lay more than 250 miles north. Mail came irregularly by boat. Fresh supplies were whatever could be carried across the lagoon. Early residents cleared land by hand, planting citrus, pineapples, and vegetables in small patches. They fished the lagoon in surf, traded with passing schooners, and survived on grit more than comfort. In 1880, the Coconut Grove House opened as the island's first hotel, a simple wooden building offering plain rooms, basic meals, and the promise of warmth to a handful of wealthy northerners escaping snow and ice. It marked the beginning of something new: seasonal migration. By 1890, the population had crept to about 200 souls. A small white church stood near the water's edge. A post office handled letters that arrived in unpredictable batches. Across the island, a separate community known as the Sticks housed many of the black laborers, cooks, fishermen, laundresses, and builders, whose work quietly sustained the fledgling settlement. Everything shifted irrevocably in the spring of 1893. Henry Morrison Flagler stepped onto sand at age 63. Already one of the richest men in America thanks to his partnership with John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil, Flagler had recently opened the dazzling Ponce de Leon Hotel in St. Augustine, a Spanish Renaissance masterpiece that proved wealthy Americans would travel great distances for luxury and sunshine. Now he sought the next frontier. He walked the narrow island for days, studying the coral bedrock beneath the sand, the sheltered lagoon to the west, the endless Atlantic to the east. He saw not the rough frontier settlement, but potential, a protected, subtropical paradise that could become the most exclusive winter resort in the nation if someone supplied the vision and the capital. Flagler began buying land immediately. In May 1893, construction began on the Royal Poinciana Hotel, destined to be the largest wooden structure on Earth. Hundreds of workers arrived by barge and boat. Materials were floated across the lagoon. The hotel rose on the western shore, facing the sunset over the water, with 1,100 rooms of grand but restrained elegance. Yet Flagler quickly realized the island could not support such a project alone. Workers needed housing. Staff required shops, laundries, markets. Guests would demand services far beyond what the tiny settlement could provide. His solution reshaped the region forever. Across Lake Worth on the mainland, he founded an entirely new town, West Palm Beach. planned from the outset as the invisible engine of luxury. Laborers, service workers, and suppliers would live and work there. Everything necessary to sustain the opulence across the water would remain out of sight, preserving the island's pristine, dreamlike atmosphere. The Royal Poinciana opened on February 11th, 1894. Just weeks later, Flagler's Florida East Coast Railway reached West Palm Beach, allowing private rail cars to deliver guests directly from northern cities to the hotel's doorstep. No dusty frontier roads required. The wealthy came in waves. Flagler expanded relentlessly. In 1896, he opened the Palm Beach on the ocean side, later renamed the Breakers, complete with a massive pier that welcomed steamships from Nassau, Havana, and Key West. A distinct winter season took shape, 8 to 12 weeks each year, when America's richest families fled the cold. They did not merely visit. They built. Enormous cottages sprang up, rivaling the grandest estates of Newport. Flagler himself set the standard in 1902 with Whitehall, his 55-room marble palace that declared Palm Beach had arrived as a playground for the elite. The town incorporated in 1911, granting residents control over their exclusive enclave. Strict social clubs formed with rigorous membership rules. Zoning laws protected ocean views and enforced architectural harmony. By the early 1920s, Palm Beach had fully transformed. Addison Misner and other architects designed lavish Mediterranean revival estates up and down the island. Worth Avenue became a showcase of luxury boutiques. The social calendar during the season rivaled New York, London, or Newport. The wilderness had vanished. In its place stood a meticulously curated paradise, reserved for those who could afford it. Private homes vied for every inch of oceanfront. Hotels catered to guests who spent without restraint. Every detail reflected wealth, taste, and ambition. The island now possessed the infrastructure, the prestige, and exclusivity to support something even grander, something that would eclipse even Flagler's Whitehall in scale and splendor. The stage was set. All that remained was for someone with boundless resources, impeccable taste, and unrelenting vision to step forward and build a palace that would define Palm Beach for generations. That moment was coming. The woman destined to create Mar-a-Lago was no ordinary heiress. Marjorie Merriweather Post arrived on the world stage with a rare combination of inherited wealth, sharp business instinct, and an unyielding drive to shape her surroundings. Born on March 15, 1887, in Springfield, Illinois, she was the only child of Charles William Post, C.W. Post, and Ella Letitia Merriweather. Her early years unfolded on a farm near Battle Creek, Michigan, where her father, a former farm machinery salesman turned health food pioneer, experimented in a small barn. C.W. Post had battled illness and found inspiration in the ideas of wellness and positive thinking. Rejecting coffee as unhealthy, he developed Postum, a grain-based beverage made from roasted wheat bran and molasses. He followed it with grape nuts in 1897 and Post Toasties in 1904, marketing them aggressively through advertisements, samples, and demonstrations. The Postum Cereal Company grew rapidly into a household name. From childhood, Marjorie was immersed in the business. As a girl, she helped paste labels on jars. By age 10, she sat in on board meetings, absorbing lessons in finance, manufacturing, and promotion that most boys her age never encountered. Her mother died in 1912, leaving Marjorie additional stock in the company. Then, on May 9, 1914, tragedy struck. C.W. Post, convinced his declining health was irreversible, took his own life at age 59. Marjorie, just 27, inherited everything, a fortune estimated at $20 million in cash and assets, equivalent to well over $500 million today, plus full control of the thriving Postum Cereal Company. She became one of America's wealthiest women almost overnight, at a time when women could not yet vote. That right arrived in 1920. Marjorie was not unprepared. Her father had groomed her deliberately, trusting her with responsibilities far beyond her years. Yet grief and the weight of responsibility tested her. In the male-dominated world of early 20th century business, she faced skepticism and structural barriers. Her first marriage, to investment banker Edward Bennett Close in 1905, produced 2 daughters, Adelaide and Eleanor, but proved mismatched. Close preferred the leisured life of Greenwich, Connecticut society over boardrooms. The marriage ended in divorce in 1919. Seeking a partner who matched her ambition, Marjorie found him in Edward Francis Hutton, a dynamic stockbroker and financier known for his bold instincts. They married in 1920. Hutton became chairman of Postum, while Marjorie retained majority ownership. Together, they propelled the company into explosive growth. In 1922, Postum went public, providing capital for expansion. The couple pursued an aggressive acquisition strategy that transformed a cereal maker into a diversified food giant. They bought Jell-O in 1925, Walter Baker Chocolate in 1927, Maxwell House Coffee in 1928, and other brands that brought new products into American kitchens. The most transformative deal came in 1929, sparked by an unexpected encounter. While sailing their yacht off Massachusetts, the couple's cook served a remarkably tasty meal featuring goose frozen 6 months earlier. At the time, frozen food was notoriously poor. Slow freezing created ice crystals that ruined texture and flavor. But Clarence Birdseye had pioneered flash freezing, preserving quality. Marjorie recognized the revolutionary potential instantly, a technology that could save housewives hours of canning and preserve seasonal foods year-round. Hutton was initially skeptical. Groceries would need costly freezers. Consumers were unaccustomed to the concept, and infrastructure barely existed. Marjorie insisted, drawing on memories of her mother laboring over preserves on the family farm. They acquired Birdseye's General Seafood Corporation, later Frosted Foods, for about $22 million with partners, securing the patents and process. To reflect the broadened scope, Postum renamed itself General Foods Corporation in 1929. Marjorie had turned a modest cereal business into one of the nation's leading food empires, pioneering convenience foods that reshaped daily life. Beyond the boardroom, Marjorie lived on a grand scale. She collected art and antiques from around the world, hosted elaborate charity events in her 54-room New York apartment on Fifth Avenue, and maintained a demanding social calendar. Yet every winter, she sought escape from northern cold. Her first Florida property was comfortable but modest, too small for the lavish entertaining she envisioned. Palm Beach, now firmly established as the winter capital of American wealth thanks to Flagler's vision, offered the ideal setting. The island had the infrastructure, the elite society, and the prestige to support something far more ambitious. In 1923, Marjorie began searching for land. Palm Beach was compact. Prime oceanfront parcels were scarce. She needed substantial acreage with dual water views, Atlantic on one side, lagoon on the other, and solid ground to withstand hurricanes. Accompanied by her realtor, she reportedly crawled through dense underbrush and jungle-like growth to inspect sites. She found it. 17 acres stretching across the island from ocean to Lake Worth Lagoon, anchored on coral bedrock for stability. The parcel was perfect. Now she required visionaries to bring her dream to life. She enlisted architect Marion Sims Wyeth, who had designed her earlier Palm Beach home and understood her preference for Mediterranean revival style. For the interiors, she turned to Joseph Urban, a Viennese-born theatrical designer renowned for his sets at the Metropolitan Opera and collaborations with Florin Ziegfeld. Urban excelled at creating dramatic, stage-like spaces that felt grand yet livable. Wyeth would handle the structural bones, floor plans, hurricane-resistant engineering, and layout. Urban would infuse spectacle, selecting exotic materials, designing opulent details, and translating Marjorie's vision into a resonance of unparalleled drama. Together, they would blend Spanish, Venetian, and Portuguese influences into something entirely new, a palace that combined old-world elegance with American scale and ambition. The businesswoman who had built General Foods from cereals into a frozen food frontier was ready to construct what would become the most expensive private residence in U.S. history. The groundwork was laid. Marjorie Merriweather Post had the fortune, the experience, the partners, and the land. Construction would soon begin, turning a stretch of Florida scrub into an enduring symbol of opulence and vision. The palace was about to rise. In the spring of 1923, Marjorie Merriweather Post stood on a stretch of untamed Florida scrubland, 17 acres of sandy soil and tangled vegetation running from the Atlantic's crashing waves to the calm shores of Lake Worth Lagoon, where stood the two men she had chosen to realize her vision, architect Marion Sims Wyeth and designer Joseph Urban. She described a residence that would transcend the typical Palm Beach estate. Something grander, more theatrical, a true palace that blended the romance of old Europe with the bold scale of American ambition. Wyeth and Urban listened intently. This would be no ordinary commission. Wyeth, a Princeton-trained architect who had already designed her earlier Palm Beach home, took charge of the structural framework. He envisioned a crescent-shaped main block curving gracefully around a central courtyard, with two-story elevations flanked by lower wings for guest rooms, service areas, and staff quarters. A commanding 75-foot tower would rise at the center, offering panoramic views across the island. Ocean to the east, lagoon to the west. Every element had to withstand Florida's hurricanes. The entire structure would anchor to the underlying coral reef with concrete and steel, creating a fortress disguised as elegance. Urban, the Viennese theatrical genius known for Metropolitan Opera sets and Ziegfeld spectacles, focused on drama and atmosphere. He dreamed of stucco walls washed in soft apricot tones, red-tiled roofs, arched lodges providing shaded outdoor living, and intricate carvings that evoked Spanish, Venetian, and Portuguese influences. The design would feel ancient yet fresh, timeless rather than trendy. Wyeth ensured engineering integrity. Urban transformed it into theater. Their collaboration proved seamless because each respected the other's domain. Bones from Wyeth, soul from Urban. Construction erupted in late 1923, transforming the quiet parcel into a hive of activity. Post spared no expense or effort. At its peak, around 600 workers, many skilled craftsmen brought from Europe, labored under the relentless sun. They blasted through stubborn coral with dynamite to lay foundations, then poured concrete to lock the house to the reef. Materials arrived from across the globe, reflecting Post's insistence on the finest regardless of cost or distance. 3 boatloads of Dorian stone sailed from Genoa, Italy, a fossil-rich limestone chosen for its rapid weathering, quickly developing a patina that made the new building appear centuries old. On-site stonemasons, including Austrian sculptors Franz Barwig and his son, carved arches, reliefs, and decorative elements according to Urban's elaborate sketches. The roof drew from Cuba, roughly 20,000 salmon-pink tiles salvaged from old houses. The dining room floor gleamed with 2,200 square feet of black and white marble blocks dismantled from a Cuban castle. The interiors demanded even greater artistry. Post had acquired a legendary collection of 36,000 antique Spanish tiles, many dating to the 15th century, from the estate of sugar magnates Louisine and Henry Havmeyer. Each tile was unique. Geometric patterns, floral motifs, historic scenes. Craftsmen spent months arranging them into coherent floors, fitting irregular shapes like a vast mosaic puzzle. Venetian silks draped certain walls. Carved wooden beams in Spanish style supported soaring ceilings. Gold leaf accented countless details, catching light in every room. The operation was immense. Workers crossed daily from West Palm Beach, enduring brutal heat and humidity. Post ensured they were fed on site, quality meals to maintain morale and productivity. Hurricanes delayed shipments. Summer exhaustion tested endurance. Yet Post visited regularly, inspecting progress, approving details most owners delegated. She kept the workforce employed through the 1926 Florida land bust downturn, turning the project into a private economic lifeline when others cut back. By 1926, the form emerged. The crescent wrapped protectively around the courtyard. The tower dominated the skyline. Dorian stone walls weathered convincingly. Interiors revealed their magic. A living room spanning over 1,800 square feet with 42-foot ceilings. A ballroom vast enough for orchestras and hundreds of dancers. Rooms each with distinct character, from intimate salons to grand halls. Gold leaf shimmered. Tiles gleamed. Marble reflected sunlight, calibrated by window placement. Final touches arrived in late 1926. Chandeliers installed, plasterwork finished, fixtures placed. The accounting reached $7 million, equivalent to roughly $120 to $130 million today. Reportedly the most expensive private residence ever built in the United States outside royal palaces. In January 1927, 4 years after groundbreaking, Mar-a-Lago opened officially. Post and Hutton hosted a grand dinner before the annual Everglades Costume Ball. Guests stepped into a completed masterpiece. The scale astonished. 126 rooms total, including 58 bedrooms and 33 bathrooms with gold-plated fixtures. Easier to clean, Post reasoned. Service wings large enough for a small army. Kitchens equipped for banquets. Storage for china, silver, and linens. The 75-foot tower offered 360-degree vistas. Grounds bloomed with tropical gardens, paths winding through palms and flowers, fulfilling the name Cedar Lake in every sense. Mar-a-Lago was more than architecture. It embodied obsessive detail. Hand-carved stone, centuries-old tiles laid with precision, gold leaf applied meticulously. It stood hurricane-proof yet inviting, grand yet livable. Palm Beach had never seen its equal. Even Flagler's Whitehall seemed restrained by comparison. Post had achieved her goal, a palace that would define the island, a residence announcing wealth, taste, and permanence. The construction chapter closed. Now began the true purpose, entertaining on a scale that would make society gasp and remember. Mar-a-Lago was ready to come alive. With the palace complete in January 1927, Marjorie Merriweather Post turned her attention to its true purpose, transforming Mar-a-Lago into the unrivaled center of Palm Beach society. She had not built a static monument, but a living stage for connection, spectacle, and influence. The first event arrived even before final fixtures dried. A pre-opening dinner in March 1927 for close friends ahead of the Everglades Club's annual fancy dress ball. Guests arrived in elaborate Louis XVI-era costumes. Post and Hutton appeared as king and queen, resplendent in jewels and silk. Workers still painted in distant wings, yet the main entertaining spaces shone, proving the house was ready for its role. Post understood the unspoken rule of 1920s wealth. Fortune alone was insufficient. One had to display it through hospitality. The most powerful statement came not from yachts or jewels, but from gathering the influential under one's roof and delivering experiences unmatched elsewhere. Mar-a-Lago delivered precisely that. From mid-January to late March each winter season, the estate became the heartbeat of Palm Beach social life. Dinner parties set the rhythm, multiple nights weekly, seating 30 to 50 guests in the vast dining room without crowding. Kitchens, staffed by chefs poached from top New York establishments, produced multi-course meals with precision. Guest lists drew from Post's unique crossroads. Corporate titan senators, European aristocrats wintering in Florida, artists, and musicians she patronized. A senator might dine beside a duchess, a Broadway composer crossed from a diplomat. Post deliberately mixed worlds, believing sparks flew when disparate lives collided. Conversations at Mar-a-Lago were never predictable. Beyond intimate dinners, she staged larger spectacles tied to causes she championed. Charity galas and fundraisers filled the ballroom, accommodating hundreds with ease. In 1929, she brought the entire Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus to grounds for a benefit, inviting underprivileged children from West Palm Beach alongside wealthy donors, a deliberate juxtaposition underscoring her belief that privilege carried communal duty. The crescent layout proved genius. Formal dinners could unfold in one wing while rehearsals happened elsewhere. Guest suites allowed visitors to stay for days. Post managed it all with the same meticulous care she applied to general foods. She kept detailed records, guest lists, menus, seating charts, refining what succeeded and what fell flat. The staff required was substantial: cooks, housekeepers, groundskeepers, servers, and more. At peak, the estate employed around 60 to 75 people full-time, many living in service wings or commuting from West Palm Beach. Post treated them well for the era, competitive wages, quality meals mirroring guest fare. Knowing content staff delivered superior service. The house also showcased her passions. Rooms brimmed with treasures from European travels. Russian imperial pieces, 18th century French furniture, Venetian glass. Yet Post never treated Mar-a-Lago as a museum. Art was for living. Guests reclined on priceless antiques, dined from rare china. Beauty belonged in use, not under glass. Personal changes reshaped the rhythm. Her marriage to Hutton frayed by the early 1930s. They divorced in 1935. That year, she wed Joseph E. Davies, a politically connected Washington lawyer. When Roosevelt appointed him ambassador to the Soviet Union in 1936, Post joined him in Moscow. Mar-a-Lago closed for 5 seasons. Brief visits occurred in the late 1930s and early 1940s, but full-scale entertaining paused amid diplomatic duties and war. In 1944, during World War II, Post repurposed the estate for wounded veterans' occupational therapy. Servicemen used the gardens and facilities for recovery programs, a gesture reflecting her sense of obligation. She returned full-time in 1948, resuming hosting on a somewhat scaled-back level as she aged and society evolved. Yet, Mar-a-Lago remained central. In 1957, she launched the International Red Cross Ball, an annual white-tie gala requiring tails and tiaras. It quickly became a Palm Beach institution, blending elegance with humanitarian purpose. The event endures today, one of Florida's most prestigious charity affairs. In 1961, Post added a pavilion with a 30 by 50-foot dance floor designed by her longtime architect Marion Sims Wyeth. There she hosted square dances, sometimes twice weekly, occasionally mixed with ballroom evenings. The informality delighted her. Palm Beach society, usually rigid, embraced the democratic joy of do as I do and all a man left. Through decades, Mar-a-Lago proved its worth. It was never meant to stand empty, but to pulse with guests, music, laughter, and purpose. For nearly 50 years, Marjorie Merriweather Post ensured it did exactly that, gathering people, advancing causes, and showing wealth could fuel generosity and connection. The palace had become more than architecture or display. It was an instrument for the life she chose, vibrant, influential, and meaningfully shared. But as Post aged, questions of legacy loomed. What would become of this extraordinary creation after her time? Mar-a-Lago anchored Marjorie Merriweather Post winters for decades, but her life extended far beyond Palm Beach's palm-lined shores. Her third marriage, in December 1935 to Joseph E. Davies, a prominent Washington lawyer with deep ties to Democratic administrations, opened a new chapter that took her into the heart of one of the most isolated and turbulent regimes on Earth. Davies had known Franklin D. Roosevelt since the Wilson era and maintained connections in high political circles. In August 1936, while vacationing in the Adirondacks, Roosevelt telephoned Davies personally. The president needed someone for a delicate diplomatic post, ambassador to the Soviet Union. Davies, intrigued by the challenge of engaging a nation America had only recognized in 1933, expressed preference for either Russia or Germany. Germany was unavailable. The Soviet Union was open. He accepted, taking the oath in November 1936. 2 months later, in early 1937, Davies, Marjorie, and his daughter Eleanor sailed for Europe, arriving in Moscow to take up residence at Spaso House, the U.S. ambassador's official home. Moscow in 1937 stood as a world of stark contradictions. Stalin's regime proclaimed a workers' paradise while enforcing terror through show trials, purges, and the secret police. Millions lived in poverty amid propaganda of progress. Foreign diplomats faced constant surveillance. Staff at Spaso House reported to Soviet intelligence. Hidden microphones captured conversations, and every move was watched. Yet for the ambassador's wife, the mission remained familiar, entertaining, hosting, and projecting American strength through hospitality. Marjorie embraced the role with characteristic energy. She transformed Spaso House into a stage for subtle diplomacy. Formal dinners brought together Soviet officials and American diplomats who rarely interacted otherwise. She oversaw every detail. Table settings, floral arrangements, often pink and yellow orchids, menus blending American products with local touches. French and Russian porcelain from her collection appeared alongside American glassware, quiet symbols of capitalist abundance in a communist state. She gifted Soviet officials American porcelain in return for their hospitality. Following diplomatic tradition, these events mattered in fragile U.S.-Soviet relations. Every cordial exchange, every successful gathering helped maintain channels of communication. At a time when mutual suspicion ran deep, Marjorie's skills, honed at Mar-a-Lago dinners, proved invaluable. She mixed guests deliberately, fostering conversations that advanced understanding between two powers on the brink of global conflict. Amid the tension, Marjorie discovered an unexpected passion: Russian imperial art. Stalin's government, desperate for foreign currency to fund industrialization, sold treasures seized after the 1917 revolution, items from the Romanovs, the Orthodox Church, and aristocratic estates. Commission shops and state storerooms offered imperial porcelain, Faberge eggs, religious icons, chalices, silver, enamels, furniture from palaces, and more. Marjorie recognized both opportunity and responsibility. While Soviet officials viewed these as relics of oppression, she saw irreplaceable masterpieces of craftsmanship. She began purchasing systematically. About 20% of her eventual collection acquired directly in the USSR, the rest through later auctions and dealers in New York, Paris, and London. Davies shared her interest, especially in icons, igniting a shared pursuit. By the end of their 18-month stay, ending June 1938, when Davies transferred to Belgium, she had laid the foundation for what became the largest and most comprehensive collection of Russian imperial art outside Russia. The collection grew over decades, nearly 90 Faberge pieces, 60 porcelain services, including items from Catherine the Great, 25 silver chalices, 2 imperial Easter eggs, Empress Alexandra's nuptial crown, furniture, liturgical objects, and rare books. Post-preserved artifacts that might have been scattered or destroyed, treating them as cultural heritage rather than mere possessions. Davies documented their Moscow years in his 1941 bestseller Mission to Moscow, later adapted into a 1943 Hollywood film directed by Michael Curtiz. And Harding portrayed Marjorie, though her role was secondary to Davies' narrative. The book and film, made at Roosevelt's encouragement, presented a sympathetic view of the Soviet Union during wartime alliance. Controversial then and later. The marriage endured 2 decades but dissolved in 1955. Marjorie retained the Russian treasures. In 1955, she purchased Hillwood, her 25-acre Washington, D.C. estate, where she displayed them alongside her French decorative arts. She willed Hillwood to become a public museum upon her death. It opened in 1977 as Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens. Today, visitors experience the Faberge eggs, porcelain icons, and more artifacts saved through her vision and resources. Marjorie never saw herself as a diplomat. She simply extended what she had always done: hosting, connecting people, preserving beauty. In Stalin's Moscow, surrounded by suspicion, purges, and surveillance, her talents adapted seamlessly. She proved her gifts transcended Palm Beach ballrooms, serving American interests and cultural preservation in one of history's most hostile environments. The Moscow years added depth to her legacy. Not just wealth displayed, but heritage safeguarded and bridges quietly built. Yet as the 1960s approached, with health declining, Marjorie began confronting the future of her creations, including the palace that had defined her winters for so long. In the late 1960s, Marjorie Merriweather Post, approaching her 9th decade, began planning the futures of her grand estates with the same practicality she had applied to business and entertaining. Hillwood in Washington would become a museum for her art collection. Camp Topridge in the Adirondacks could transfer to New York State. Mar-a-Lago, however, presented a unique challenge. No single family could sustain its operating costs, staff, grounds maintenance, utilities, repairs, which exceeded $1 million annually in the era's dollars. Her daughters, including actress Dina Merrill, had their own lives and no interest in managing such a burden. Demolition crossed her mind. Other Gilded Age mansions from the 1920s had already fallen to developers in Palm Beach and beyond. The 17 ocean to lagoon acres alone held immense value. Yet, destroying what had taken 4 years and millions to build felt like erasing her legacy. A different path emerged. The federal government maintained retreats like Camp David and Blair House for presidential use. Why not a Winter White House in Florida? The estate could host foreign leaders in a setting showcasing American achievement. Private, scenic, architecturally impressive. It aligned with her vision of wealth-serving national purpose. Lawyers structured the bequest carefully. Upon her death, Mar-a-Lago would transfer to the National Park Service as a diplomatic and presidential retreat, with a trust fund providing about $100,000 yearly for upkeep. Congress approved the gift in 1972, and President Nixon signed the acceptance legislation. Mar-a-Lago was designated a National Historic Site, earlier recognized on the National Register in 1972, and as a National Historic Landmark in 1980. Post received the recognition she sought. Her palace would endure as a symbol of American hospitality. On September 12, 1973, Marjorie Merriweather Post died at Hillwood after a long illness, aged 86. Mar-a-Lago passed government ownership as planned. Problems surfaced immediately. Nixon already had his Florida retreat at Key Biscayne, which he preferred. He made one inspection visit in 1974, his only appearance there, before Watergate consumed his presidency. Gerald Ford favored Colorado ski slopes over Florida beaches. The estate sat largely empty, its grand rooms silent. Jimmy Carter's administration evaluated it seriously. Staff toured the property, assessed needs, and calculated costs. The verdict was grim. The trust fund covered barely 10% of actual expenses. Taxpayers would bear the rest indefinitely. Security posed further hurdles. A public road ran nearby. Palm Beach International Airport generated constant noise, and protecting a president would require major infrastructure upgrades that did not exist. Carter's team recommended returning the property. Congress debated through 1979 and 1980. In December 1980, legislation, Public Law 96 to 586, transferred Mar-a-Lago back to the Marjorie Merriweather Post Foundation. Federal ownership lasted roughly 7 to 8 years. No president ever spent night there. The dream of a winter White House dissolved under the weight of practicality. The foundation now faced the same economics that prompted the donation. Maintenance costs had not decreased. The trust fund remained inadequate. Post daughters had no desire to operate the estate. Mar-a-Lago went on the market listed at $20 million, a steep price reflecting its history, size, and irreplaceable craftsmanship. Buyers did not materialize. The mansion was too vast for practical family use. Operating expenses deterred serious interest. The real estate market softened in the early 1980s. Several potential deals collapsed before closing. Financing failed. Inspections revealed costly repairs, or buyers reconsidered the burden. Without sufficient staff, neglect set in. Paint peeled from exterior walls. Gardens, once meticulously manicured, grew wild and overgrown. Tropical plants turned into jungle. The house that had hosted royalty and diplomats stood mostly empty, visited only by caretakers and occasional prospects who inevitably walked away. By 1985, the foundation reached a reluctant decision. Mar-a-Lago would be demolished. The land would subdivide into smaller lots for development. Everything Post created, the imported Dorian stone, the 36,000 antique tiles, the gold leaf ceilings, would vanish. Palm Beach would lose another irreplaceable 1920s mansion to modern economics. Demolition permits were filed. Wrecking crews prepared to move in within months. For a brief, precarious moment, Marjorie Merriweather Post's dream teetered on the edge of erasure. The palace that had defied hurricanes, economic crashes, and shifting fortunes now faced its greatest threat yet, oblivion. Then a New York real estate developer made a phone call, and the story took its next dramatic turn. As demolition permits sat ready and wrecking crews prepared to move in during 1985, a new figure entered the story, Donald Trump. At 39, he was riding high from successes in New York real estate. Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue had opened in 1983, cementing his reputation as a bold developer. While vacationing in Florida, he spotted Mar-a-Lago, 17 acres spanning ocean to lagoon, a Mediterranean-style palace that looked transported from another era. The Post Foundation had listed it at $20 million, reflecting decades of construction costs and irreplaceable craftsmanship. Nothing else on the Florida coast matched its combination of land, location, and grandeur. Trump's initial offer of $15 million was rejected outright. Other buyers circled, some signing contracts, but deals collapsed. Financing faltered, inspections exposed expensive repairs, or the sheer operating burden scared them off. Trump watched patiently as the market softened and the property languished. He devised a strategic pivot. A narrow strip of beachfront land separated Mar-a-Lago from the Atlantic, a parcel owned by Jack C. Massey, the businessman who had built Kentucky Fried Chicken into a national chain. Trump purchased it for $2 million. He then publicly announced plans to build a large home there, one that would rise directly in Mar-a-Lago sightline. From a famous loggia and main terrace, guests would see Trump's roof instead of unobstructed ocean horizon. The estate's signature panoramic views, the very feature that made it legendary, would be permanently compromised. The threat worked instantly. The foundation recognized the danger. Selling a reduced price hurt, but allowing a spite house to block the scenery while property remained unsold would devastate its value. Competing interests evaporated. Prospective buyers vanished. No one wanted a historic mansion with a rival structure ruining its most celebrated asset. Negotiations resumed under new pressure. Trump also understood what the foundation held beyond land and buildings. Rooms filled with antique furniture, oriental carpets, porcelain, silver, and decorative objects Marjorie Post had collected over 5 decades. Independent appraisers valued these contents at around $8 million, nearly half the original asking price for the entire estate. By December 1985, both sides signed an agreement. Historical accounts vary slightly on the exact figures. Trump later wrote in The Art of the Deal that he paid $5 million for the house and land plus $3 million for furnishings, with the adjacent beachfront lot adding $2 million. Contemporary reports and sources often cite a total around $8 to $10 million. The precise breakdown matters less than the outcome. Trump acquired Mar-a-Lago for roughly half its listed value, or less. The antiques and furniture alone may have equaled or exceeded his payment for the real estate. A remarkable bargain for a property whose original construction cost the equivalent of over $100 million in modern terms. Ivana Trump took immediate charge of restoration. Contractors swarmed the estate. Roofs were repaired, mechanical systems replaced, overgrown gardens cleared and replanted. The work lasted months and cost millions beyond the purchase price. When complete, the mansion gleamed again, its Dorian stone walls weathered to perfection. Antique tiles restored, gold leaf revived. Trump began inviting guests. Business associates flew in to see the property. Celebrities attended gatherings in rooms that had once welcomed diplomats and royalty. After over a decade of near silence, Mar-a-Lago filled with life once more. Trump had seen what others missed. Where buyers saw crushing expenses and a white elephant, he saw opportunity. Unmatched land configuration impossible to replicate under modern zoning, a historic structure with prestige, and contents worth a fortune. He paid around $10 million, adjusted for inflation, roughly $30 million today, for something built at enormous cost and backed by irreplaceable heritage. The palace that had nearly vanished was reborn under new ownership. Yet financial pressures loomed ahead, and the estate's future would require yet another transformation, one that turned a private residence into a thriving enterprise. Mar-a-Lago had found its next chapter, one defined by bold negotiation, restoration, and reinvention. By 1990, Donald Trump faced mounting financial headwinds. His Atlantic City casinos hemorrhaged money amid a national recession and over-leveraged debt. The real estate market cooled sharply. Bankers who once clamored to fund his projects now scrutinized his ability to repay loans. The empire that appeared limitless in the late 1980s had contracted dramatically. Mar-a-Lago added to the strain. Annual maintenance costs exceeded $3 million. Constant staffing, landscaping, climate control, repairs, and utilities persisted regardless of occupancy. Bills arrived relentlessly. Trump approached the Palm Beach Town Council with a proposal: subdivide the 17-acre estate into smaller residential lots and sell them to developers. The mansion would remain intact, but the surrounding grounds would generate immediate cash flow to offset expenses. The council rejected the plan. Mar-a-Lago held National Historic Landmark status, designated in 1980, and neighbors opposed new construction, traffic, and disruption. Officials directed Trump to find another solution or bear the cost alone. Negotiations dragged on for years. In 1993, a compromise emerged. Trump could convert the estate into a private membership club. He would preserve the historic structure and grounds while gaining permission for limited commercial activities, events, dining, guest accommodations, and amenities for members. In exchange, the town allowed this use under strict conditions, including limits on events and member stays. No full-time residency for members, though Trump retained private quarters. The Mar-a-Lago Club opened in 1995. Initiation fees began at $25,000. Some reports cite higher figures, around $100,000 initially, with annual dues adding thousands more. Membership capped at around 500. Members gained access to the pool, tennis courts, spa, beach club, dining rooms, and the ability to host private events in spaces once reserved for diplomats and royalty. A waiting list formed quickly. The club distinguished itself beyond architecture and amenities. Palm Beaches established private clubs, such as the Bath and Tennis Club or Everglades Club, long maintained restrictive policies. Jewish applicants often faced perpetual waitlist or outright exclusion. African American families were quietly discouraged or barred. These unwritten rules persisted in the 1990s, enforced subtly but consistently. Only a handful of clubs were open to Jews, and fewer still to black members. Trump took a different path. Mar-a-Lago accepted members regardless of religion, race, or background. Jewish families joined alongside long-standing Protestant dynasties. African-American professionals received equal consideration. The club reportedly welcomed gay couples at a time when many establishments did not. Whether driven by genuine principle or shrewd business calculation became a point of debate. Skeptics noted that Palm Beach had a significant Jewish population without a fully open elite club of their own. Welcoming them tapped an underserved market. Supporters argued that challenging local norms required boldness, regardless of motive. The results were clear. Applications surged beyond capacity. Revenue from dues, events, and catering stabilized the property's finances. Membership provided a sustainable model where previous owners, the government, the Post Foundation, and private buyers, had seen only burdens. The approach created friction with longtime residents. Some viewed Trump as deliberately appending the old social order. In 1997, he filed a $100 million lawsuit against the town, alleging officials imposed excessive restrictions on Mar-a-Lago, restrictions not applied to other clubs that excluded minorities. Trump claimed discrimination because his club accepted Jewish and African American members, while town leaders had ties to restrictive establishments. The Anti-Defamation League praised him for spotlighting discriminatory practices in Palm Beach clubs. The suit eventually settled, restrictions eased by the late 1990s. Initiation fees rose substantially as demand grew, reaching $100,000 by the early 2000s and later higher. The property that once threatened to bankrupt Trump now generated millions annually. He maintained private quarters in a closed-off wing, while the rest operated as a thriving business. Celebrities performed for members. Celine Dion, Billy Joel, and others gave concerts. The International Red Cross Ball, the prestigious charity gala Marjorie Post founded, continued under new stewardship. The House Post bill for grand entertaining found a viable future, not as a family home, not as a government retreat, but as a private club where membership itself conferred status, access, and prestige. Trump solved the economic riddle that defeated predecessors, turning fixed costs into revenue streams. The palace had adapted once more, securing its survival through commerce and inclusivity in a changing Palm Beach. Yet preservation and expansion would define the next phase, as Trump invested further to elevate its grandeur. When Donald Trump acquired Mar-a-Lago in 1985, much of Marjorie Merriweather Post's original splendor had faded. Years of minimal upkeep under government and foundation stewardship had taken a toll. Gold leaf dulled under Florida's humidity and salt air. Murals lost vibrancy. The meticulous craftsmanship of the 1920s, hand-carved stone antique tiles, ornate plaster, required expert revival to endure. Ivana Trump oversaw the initial restoration, coordinating specialists who respected the estate's history. Among them was Richard Haynes, appointed as the estate's artist in residence. His father had served as Post Chief Gilder during the original construction, delicately applying gold leaf to ceilings and decorative elements. The younger Haynes had learned the craft by observing his father at work. Now he restored what his father created, using sheets of 23-karat gold, thinner than tissue paper, to re-gild surfaces throughout the mansion. He also rebuilt 40 ram's heads jutting from the roofline, decorative sculptures weathered by decades of sun and sea spray. Faded murals regained their original vivid colors through careful conservation techniques. Interior decorator Buffy Donlin, sometimes referenced as Buffy Donlin, coordinated the broader effort. The guiding principle was preservation over transformation, honor Post vision, while updating for modern club use. Rooms were refreshed without erasing their character. Antique tiles cleaned and reset, marble floors polished, silk draperies repaired or replicated where needed. The work earned formal recognition. In 1998, the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation awarded Reg Architects, master planners for Mar-a-Lago since 1995, for outstanding restoration, rehabilitation, and conversion of the property into a club. The award celebrated how historic integrity was maintained amid adaptation for heavier use, including ADA accessibility and event flow. Trump sought more than faithful repair. When the club opened in 1995, large events often relied on temporary tents on the grounds, air conditioning units on trailers, portable restrooms brought in for guests. Functional, but lacking the grandeur members expected. Post's original white and gold ballroom measured impressive, but insufficient for Palm Beach's biggest charity galas and society gatherings. Trump proposed a new ballroom. As a National Historic Landmark, every change required scrutiny from preservation authorities and the town council. The addition could not overwhelm the original Spanish Mediterranean architecture. Architects positioned the structure in a low area behind existing walls, minimizing visibility from the road. The exterior matched the main house's style, stucco, red tile roof, arches, for seamless integration. The town approved plans in October 1999. The interior told a bolder story. Trump modeled the Donald J. Trump Grand Ballroom after the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, Louis XIV's masterpiece of royal opulence. Construction spanned several years. Completed in 2005, with its New Year's Eve gala serving as a debut, the space spanned 20,000 square feet, nearly double the size of Post's original ballroom. Coffered ceilings soared 40 feet overhead. 17 crystal chandeliers, imported from Czechoslovakia at roughly $250,000 each, hung from gilded surfaces. Floor-to-ceiling mirrors lined one wall, echoing Versailles' reflective illusion of infinite space. Gold leaf alone cost $7 million. 4 gold-plated bathroom sinks near the entrance, fixtures costing $100,000, set the tone before guests entered the main hall. The total project cost approximately $35 to $40 million. Sources vary slightly, with some contemporary reports citing $35 million and others $40 million. Critics question the stylistic clash. French Baroque grandeur against the estate's Mediterranean roots. Preservationists who praise a careful main house restoration wondered if the addition honored Post's vision or introduced excess. Yet practicality prevailed. The new ballroom gave Mar-a-Lago a venue for the island's largest events. The International Red Cross Ball, the white tie gala Post founded, relocated to the grand space. Society functions that once went elsewhere now returned. Trump's wedding to Melania Knauss took place there in January 2005, with hundreds of guests surrounded by gold, crystal, and mirrors in a setting unmatched in Florida. Post had built Mar-a-Lago to impress with what American wealth could achieve. Trump added a ballroom that delivered the same message in updated vocabulary. Scale, luxury, spectacle. The intention remained constant. Create spaces that inspire awe and command attention. Through careful restoration and ambitious expansion, Mar-a-Lago evolved from a fading relic into a vibrant, modern icon. The palace that Post dreamed into existence now stood stronger, grander, ready for its next century of hosting, entertaining, and defining Palm Beach prestige. Marjorie Merriweather Post believed wealth carried deep obligations. This conviction shaped her life from her earliest days of fortune, long before Mar-a-Lago rose or General Foods dominated. She viewed money not as personal property, but as a temporary trust, something to justify through action. The galas, yachts, and mansions drew headlines. The hospitals funded, concerts given, and lives quietly touched defined her more profoundly. Her giving began early, during World War I. Still in her 20s and newly wealthy, she rolled bandages for the Red Cross and funded medical efforts abroad. When the U.S. entered the war, she financed a hospital ship bound for France. Though one shipment was lost in a collision, she persisted, funding supplies that reached Savenay, France, establishing Base Hospital No. 8, the largest Red Cross facility in wartime Europe. In 1957, France honored her with the Legion of Honor Commander degree, its highest civilian award, recognizing her enduring friendship and contributions. Post supported the American Red Cross consistently, serving as a donor and active volunteer. Its practical, immediate disaster relief aligned with her values. help that arrived when needed most. She also backed the Salvation Army, which focused on feeding the hungry and sheltering the homeless, causes she prioritized over purely cultural institutions. The Great Depression tested her resolve. As unemployment soared, breadlines lengthened, and despair spread, Post refused to retreat behind gates. From 1929 onward, she financed and personally supervised the Salvation Army feeding station in New York, serving up to 1,000 people daily through the hardest years. She sponsored charity balls at Madison Square Garden and led fundraising for the Salvation Army's Women's Emergency Aid Committee, mobilizing resources when many wealthy Americans withdrew. Education and youth earned her sustained commitment. She donated the cost of the Boy Scouts of America headquarters in Washington, D.C., and supported their programs generously. In 1971, she became one of the first 3 recipients of the Silver Fawn Award, a variant of the Silver Beaver for distinguished service to boyhood, recognizing her contributions. Lake Merriweather at Goshen Scout Reservation in Virginia bears her name, as does Camp Post, enduring tributes to her impact on scouting. Music held special place. As a major patron of the National Symphony Orchestra, she served on its board and gave millions overall. In 1955, she contributed $100,000 to launch free public concerts, birthing the Music for Young America program. She funded it annually, introducing classical music to children who might never hear it otherwise. Her support extended to the National Cultural Center in Washington, where a $100,000 gift helped realize what became the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. The Merriweather Post Pavilion in Columbia, Maryland, an open-air venue opened in 1967, honors her sustained backing of the National Symphony and accessible concerts in Symphony Woods. Much of her philanthropy remained anonymous. She aided individuals, families in hardship, students needing tuition, estate workers facing difficulties, without seeking publicity. During crises, depression, war, disasters, she responded with both funds and organizational skill. The same precision that made her party's legendary raise money for those with none. Post understood that true legacy lay not in accumulation, but in impact. She amassed art jewels, estates, friendships, yet what she gave away mattered more. Her talents, hosting, connecting, preserving, served broader good, whether in Palm Beach ballrooms or Soviet drawing rooms. In her 9th decade, she continued giving to the Red Cross, Salvation Army, Scouts, Symphony, Kennedy Center, and countless others. Her will included endowments, but her lifetime actions built the foundation. Marjorie Merriweather Post lived like royalty, yet gave like a steward. She proved wealth could uplift, preserve, and endure, not just for few, but for generations. Her palace at Mar-a-Lago, now a club, still echoes that spirit, a place of gathering, beauty, and purpose. The woman who built it refused to let fortune sit idle. Instead, she turned it outward, generous, purposeful, transformative. In the end, Marjorie Merriweather Post's greatest creation was not a mansion or empire, but a model of what responsibility looks like when paired with immense means.